the flood water that comes from Angola is drying up. The channels start to break up and get isolated, forming little pools, fish traps. For any birds or crocodiles, it's an ideal place to get a meal over several days. There are a few distinct characters in these pools. The hurried bustle of the spoonbills with their frenetic side-to-side movements of their bills contrasts against the yellowbill storks, who prefer a much more cautious and much more stealthy approach. Every now and then one comes out with a rather large fish, and in this case a spoonbill. Not being able to swallow it immediately creates quite a stir as the other individuals mug him for his meal. These saddlebill storks are incredibly beautiful and are always at these drying pools. And I never noticed how territorial they can be. A marabou stork pushed in, and it didn't take the saddlebill storks long to react and try and chase him from the pool. The activity brings in crocodiles from neighboring pools. I was very surprised to see the amount of quite large and substantial crocs in these pools. There must have been 15 or 16 crocs in this pool. They seem to glide around and put their heads underneath, and then they sort of turn. Clearly they were trying to catch fish that are on the bottom. It's quite amazing how they just move around each other, so comfortable being so close to each other and knowing that it's unlikely that the croc is going to snap at them. It's an unbelievable amount of understanding.
This is a male, despite the fact that it has no tusks. You can clearly see it's a male. Normally, Asian elephants, the females don't have tusks and the males do, but occasionally one sees a male that also doesn't develop tusks, as is the case here. It's not a very large one. But seems to be on its own and therefore old enough to be taking up the solitary life of a male. Once it reaches a certain age, it will leave the family group and live alone. And I think he's got an eye on us here. He was a little bit skittish, headed off to the side and had a little think about it, I think, before coming back to the water again. We are only about 30 to 40 meters away behind some shade netting underneath a little rickety platform that's up in the trees, but that platform isn't actually very high. Certainly even this elephant could reach up and do some damage to it if he wanted to. So it's a rather nervous few minutes for us here. but eventually he just carried on moving on past us. And although we lost sight of him, we could hear him for a long time afterwards, getting into a thicket of bamboo and really doing some damage.
Today we decided to explore the Shokwe forest, and Shokwe in Shangaan means to touch. It's really humid below the forest canopy, and the forest floor is covered in leaves and debris. When you sit in one place for some time, your eye becomes accustomed to your surroundings, and things seem to come alive around you. Low down on the floor, we spotted what we thought was a tinker reed frog. It's a magnificent green color. I had to get down low with the camera right down on the ground, and having macro lenses made it easy to get in close to the frog. I love the smaller creatures that are not so obvious. This extremely beautiful specimen, which is only about 3 centimeters, shows you why. What was really fascinating was its feet, which had those large discs on the end of its toes, which are used to grip onto the side of reeds. These jelly-like yellow feet were translucent, and if you look carefully, you can see right through to the branch below. While we were down on our knees, we spotted another frog. We could hardly see it as we looked across the forest floor. It was so well camouflaged. We think this frog was a juvenile guttural toad, but with the lack of light in the forest, it was hard to tell. Up close, this frog with its mottled markings and large protruding eye, it was just magnificent to watch. Above us, a praying mantis looked down on us as it devoured a small larvae. You think you are alone in this forest, but there are so many eyes watching you.
These hermit crabs, as they continue to grow throughout their lives, will move from one shell to another. As soon as they come across a shell that they suspect will fit it, he'll give it a bit of a closer inspection. They usually put one claw in just to make sure it's unoccupied, and then will enter abdomen first, and if the fit is good and they're satisfied, we'll then move on. It is so hot here at 10 degrees south of the equator that the crabs must forage at night to prevent themselves from drying out. These hermit crabs have all been attracted to the same area, and here they will withdraw the moisture from the ground as well as forage on the dead leaf matter and plant matter. Now it's almost like last round at the bar. The crabs all come together and they all take what they can. It's pretty much every man for himself, and a swift kick to the head is not uncommon practice. Little scuffles will often break out, sometimes ganging up on each other. Now there's one hermit crab that is just leagues apart from all the rest. And this is in fact a juvenile coconut crab. Now coconut crabs are essentially just hermit crabs, but because of the size that they grow to, they really begin to dominate all the other hermit crabs in the vicinity. The tinier hermit crabs here are definitely wary of their larger cousins and approach really gingerly. This was quite interesting for me as a second juvenile coconut crab entered the fray, and they immediately noticed one another and then came together in this type of identification process. I wouldn't exactly call it a greeting, just maybe one asserting slight dominance over the other. This proved to be correct ultimately, as the smaller of the two coconut crabs eventually retreated within his shell and stayed put, while the second slightly larger coconut crab began to harass his mate a bit. Eventually, these coconut crabs will not be able to find a shell big enough to accommodate them, and from there, they'll take out into the forest. They are primarily nocturnal, and during the day, they'll spend their time in crevices within the coral island or in holes underneath trees, and only come out during the evenings to forage. Now, this crab is not fully grown. He probably weighs around the 1 kilogram mark, and a full-grown adult will weigh as much as 4 kilograms, and their lifespans are comparable to that of human beings.